5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Subscribe, Space Snack.
Hi, Robert. Can you hear me?
I can, Terry. How are you?
Great. Thanks for taking the time. So this is a taped interview that we will use in stories that'll play out in a couple of weeks on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, The Today Show, MSNBC, all our various platforms. So thank you for taking a couple of minutes to get us on your schedule today.
Sure.
Okay. So first off, could you say your first and last name so when an editor pulls this tape out and looks at it in a couple of weeks, they'll know what they're looking at?
Sure. My name is Bob Behnken.
And to be clear, you go by Bob, not Robert, right?
I do.
Okay, great. Thank you. First question, the elephant in the room, COVID-19. How has that impacted your training for the mission, and then also what will be occurring on launch day?
You know, it's been interesting as we've kind of gone through the pandemic and kind of adapted to COVID-19. For us, what's really happened is the normal quarantine that astronauts go through about 2 weeks prior to launch to really ensure that we don't take anything to the International Space Station or get the crew on orbit sick or be sick when we get on orbit. We've had to kind of stretch out and kind of begin closer to 10 weeks prior, frankly, which has been a little bit of a difference, but it's actually been kind of nice that all of our families were kind of going through that same experience, and so we're kind of all on the same page in terms of how to operate. It wasn't a training program at the 2-week point. It's been a good solid 10 weeks of being in quarantine.
And will it look different on launch day? Will there be less people going up the elevator into the gantry, or will it look fairly similar to what we've seen in the past on shuttle launches?
Certainly in terms of our crew getting strapped into the vehicle, of course it's a Dragon capsule, so it'll be different than the shuttle, but they're not making a lot of changes in terms of the number of people that are required to get us strapped in and ready to go. As you know, it's already a little bit of a dangerous environment out there with hypergulls, rocket propellant loaded on the vehicle, if you will, that we need to protect people from. What will be different is the causeway and the number of guests who will be able to watch from a distance, normally in large groups, kind of looking across the water and seeing the launch happen. We're not expecting that to be possible based on the COVID-19 situation. And so folks will be hopefully watching at home on their computers or on the television when we launch into space rather than seeing it with their own eyes, which is, it's a little bit of a disappointment, but with the situation, I think it's the right thing for folks to stay protected.
You touched on what my next question was going to be. You've obviously flown past shuttle missions. What are the differences between the Crew Dragon and the shuttle? I mean, I'm sure you could talk for hours about it, but the main thing when you're there in the cockpit, what's going to look different when people look at those cameras from over your shoulder?
The two big differences really are the shuttle was a hauling truck. It could take a big payload into orbit in addition to the crew members that were headed to space station, for example. So the Dragon is a smaller capsule, so it'll only be seats for 4 people in there, and Doug and I will be in 2 of them. So a smaller crew, not a lot of cargo. It'll also look a lot more modern on the inside. The shuttle was built decades ago and had a lot of switch interfaces that maybe folks would be familiar with if they looked at old hardware. The Dragon is going to look a lot newer and modern and sleek. A touchscreen interface. There certainly still are some buttons and switches and lights, but it is definitely a lot cleaner cockpit than the space shuttle was.
How overall it's been 9 years since we've put men up on a U.S. rocket. How has technology changed in that 9-year period? Any specifics jump out at you as a drastic difference? I mean, even the spacesuits look different. Give me some examples of that if you could.
It's really been exciting to see the way that SpaceX has incorporated and innovated to try to bring new technology into the spaceflight arena. And so for crews that are launching into space, when we did it with crews for the space shuttle, we were doing it with some really old hardware. I think laptops hadn't been invented, of course, when we started flying the space shuttle. And so we used to Velcro and duct tape all those things into place so that we could fly our space shuttle mission. Now all that capability is really incorporated on board the vehicle and internalized so that it does make for a nice, clean cockpit. They've also been really innovative and quick to incorporate new features or hardware opportunities into the Dragon vehicle. So, for example, things that might take years to change on a space shuttle, if you could ever get them changed, they've been able in just a few short months in many cases to incorporate something new. So we've got a nice tablet interface that we can use to keep track of things in addition to the regular vehicle interfaces. And so I've just been really excited to see the innovation and how quickly commonplace items can end up on board the SpaceX vehicle.
Question, if you can look ahead, on launch day, what are your emotions going to be? Nervous, excited? How do you think you're feeling?
I think that I have answered this question several times, and I think it's something that's unique about the folks that are selected to be astronauts. I expect us to have a little bit of excitement going into the mission, but also tempered with a kind of an extreme focus on being able to execute the things that are in front of us. And that folks often talk about, are you afraid of the mission? Are you afraid to ride a rocket or things like that? I think in our experience, we're actually most afraid of making a mistake and kind of taking away the progress or the success of the mission from the folks that have worked so hard to make it possible. And so, I really expect maybe a tinge of nervousness, but it's really going to be dominated by that precise focus on everything that's in front of us to pull off a mission like this.
And my clock is ticking out. I think I got time for one more. You touched on the work with SpaceX and how that's different than just the NASA days. How is that different, and are you confident in SpaceX and their product?
One of the things that's really been interesting over the last couple of years as we've learned to work with our commercial partners is how both SpaceX and NASA have evolved to work together. It takes a lot of confidence and audacity to pull off a human spaceflight mission, but you also need to be a little bit paranoid that things can get complicated really quick, and you need to be prepared for that. And so I think maybe that preparation piece has come from the NASA side, and that audacity piece maybe has come from the SpaceX side, and we've kind of merged it together to get where we are right now, from my perspective at least. We've had to both kind of modify what our expectations are, both SpaceX and NASA kind of coming together in the middle.
Great, thanks. I've been given the wrap, but thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll get to meet face-to-face down the road when we're past all this. So.
All this COVID thing or in some sort of virtual space as well. Thank you, Terry.
All right, have a good weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob, Rachel Crane from CNN, thank you so much for joining us. I just want to get right into it. For years, the U.S. has been paying Russia upwards of $80 million per seat to get U.S. astronauts to the International Space Station. So what is the significance of bringing these missions back to American soil?
I think there's a lot of significance, Rachel, to bringing these missions back to American soil. First, as you alluded to, kind of an alternative to the Soyuz solution that's out there, which gives us both an alternative for some political reasons, but also some robustness if we should find a problem with the Soyuz vehicle and need an alternative. But as an American, I'm just proud of what we'll be able to accomplish and fly again on an American rocket from American soil. This is something that we'll have achieved, and as an American, I'll be proud of it when we've accomplished it.
Now, Demo-2 is hardly the first time you've put your life on the line. You've been to space twice already. Prior to that, you were a test pilot. But, humans have never flown in a spacecraft, and you're a father now. So does that add an extra layer of anxiety to this mission for you?
Certainly, after having a child and being a father, there is a different level of preparation, both to share the mission with my son, which is something I'm super excited to have the opportunity to do. Of course, he's only seen pictures and video from before he was born from my previous missions. But certainly there is risk associated with a mission like this as we go forward. But I do want him to know that it's a mission that I feel strongly about. It's going forward in a way that I think is important for us as humans, but as Americans as well. And I want him to be proud of his father as we kind of go forward with the mission.
Now, in normal times, hundreds of thousands of people from all over the country would flock to the Space Coast, line the causeway to watch this historic space flight, but they're being told to stay at home because of COVID-19. Does the pandemic cloud this launch?
From my perspective, the pandemic itself doesn't really change what we're trying to accomplish here. We're trying to do something that Americans have accomplished again, flying off the Florida coast on an American rocket. And I'm really looking forward to what folks share with me as the creative way that they've been able to still follow along with the mission, whether that's at home or in kind of a family viewing area they've been able to watch it, or kind of separated in another way as they try to follow the constraints that we need to live under so that we can remain safe and kind of get this virus under control so we can get back to some more sense of normalcy. But I don't think it clouds in any way. It will just change the experience and how people are able to, in some sense, share it and absorb it as it actually happens.
Now, you and Doug have known each other for ages. You were even at each other's weddings. So does that relationship, how does that help you in the cockpit, that history?
One of the things that's really helpful for us as a crew is the long relationship that Doug and I have had. We're kind of at the point in our experience, whether it's flying in the T-38 or executing in a SpaceX simulation or approaching and docking to the International Space Station, where we, in addition to finishing each other's sentences, we can predict almost by body language what the person's opinion is or what their next action is going to be. And so our efficiency when we work through malfunctions or cooperate to kind of deal with situations that are presented to us as we prepare for the space flight or we execute the space flight, we just can save that much more time as we try to work together and go forward. We don't surprise each other. We remain predictable, and we've just been doing that so long that it's kind of like having a second set of hands or a second set of eyes, because I can trust he's going to jump off and do his piece. I'll jump off and do my piece. I know where he's going to stop. We know how we're going to hand back together to continue on cooperating. So it's like cooperating on a sports team, pulling off a football play or in basketball or otherwise, where we know our role, we execute it, and we try to be reliable and predictable as we do it to be as successful as we can.
Now, SpaceX designed, built, owns, and operates Crew Dragon. NASA is just the customer. So how does that new relationship change the experience for the astronauts like you?
For us as astronauts, the relationship that SpaceX has with owning the vehicle and operating the vehicle has an interesting asterisk next to it, which is that inside the vehicle, we do have a lot of capabilities that we need to know how to use should problems arise. And so we have spent a lot of years developing what those capabilities should be to keep the crew safe. We primarily focus on putting capabilities in the crew's hands that allow them to safely make it back from their space mission. And so we really have focused on those things and making sure that they're very robust and in place the way that you'd want them. If you were going to put your lives in the hand of a spacecraft, there'd be some things that you'd still need to be able to do to make sure that you could safely come home. That being caveated with, of course, the SpaceX team has kind of facilitated getting us to that point. So they've designed the vehicle the way that they would like it to provide us these features that put us in control at specific times or in specific situations.
Now, one last question. It wasn't always clear that it was going to be you flying this new generation of spacecraft. Boeing has also been developing a crew capsule for years. So how does it feel that it's you and SpaceX that won this race?
Well, the race isn't over until it's over. We definitely feel like we're in the lead to make it to the International Space Station and retrieve the flag that STS-135 left behind. But we aren't really focused on who's going to win and who's going to lose. We really are focused on making sure that we technically, get into space and get this vehicle checked out and accomplish the ultimate mission, which isn't winning against Boeing. It's providing this capability to the International Space Station so that we can start rotating crews from American soil. So that's the mission that's in front of Doug and I, is providing that capability and getting this vehicle checked out so that the next mission on a SpaceX vehicle will be as successful and be able to focus really on the mission of Space Station, which is that science and research that needs to happen up there.
Well, Bob, thank you so much. Certainly looks like you guys are going to win this race here. Really appreciate the time and can't wait to be on the ground with you in Florida and watch this amazing launch.
Well, thank you, Rachel. Look forward to you guys getting able to see it. It should be a great show.
Thank you. Bob, Doug sort of dodged this question, but I'm trying to see if you're willing to go for it. What's your call sign and how did you come by it?
Did you ask him the question about me, or did you ask him the question about him?
About him, and he said too long to tell.
Oh yeah, the call signs are long stories, I think, and so mine was, they call me Dr. Bob, which was kind of funny. I think when I showed up to my first military unit, I was a lieutenant, which is of course a pretty junior ranking officer in the Air Force, and I went to a research lab and. It kind of got questionable at times where Lieutenant Bob would have an opinion, and it was more important that Dr. Bob had an opinion in the technical community than Lieutenant Bob. So that kind of name stuck after that when I came to test pilot school.
Do you remember what you wrote on your application as an astronaut about why you wanted to be an astronaut?
That's a really good question. In terms of what I wrote on that, let me think for a minute what I would have written on that application. You know, I can't remember exactly what the words were. We used to have to write a short a paragraph to kind of present to the audience there in the selection board. I expect that what I wrote on that point was that I really was already doing the role of an astronaut as a flight test engineer at Edwards Air Force Base, and I really liked the job that I was doing and thought that just the next extension was, you know, to go off and be an astronaut. So I think it was most likely a scenario along those lines that I'm effectively, you know, doing the same thing for airplanes right now and just take it to the next level.
So you're part of an astronaut family. I mean, you're flying a historic mission. Megan saved Hubble. What's dinner talk like at your house?
You know, luckily for us in our house, dinner talk can be really focused on other things outside the astronaut office because between my wife and I, we kind of already know all the work stuff, and so we don't have to rehash it over dinner and talk too much about what happened at work because she's seeing the same email traffic that I am. So inside of our house, we're luckily able to, you know, focus on our family or focus on our son or these days focus how we're going to manage around the, you know, the pandemic or otherwise to keep our lifestyle as normal as possible, just like everybody else.
You talked about Voyager and how inspiring Voyager was. How has Voyager taken you to this point?
You know, for me, NASA's missions over the years are just kind of things that have kind of punctuated kind of my experience. And so whether it's looking at imagery of a Viking lander or on a television screen and kind of seeing those images of the Martian surface, which was, you know, pretty inspiring as a child to see those sorts of things happen. So that was normal to me. When the Voyager probes were sending back their data and, you know, we didn't live in an internet age. I had to wait at least for the annual to come back when the encyclopedias with how many new moons had been discovered around one of the gas giants. It just gave me. I looked forward to those things. It gave me an appetite for science that was around that science in the annual encyclopedia books, if you will, when there wasn't new Voyager data that was coming back. And so that's really what it did for me. And, you know, that extended all the way through, you know, things that might normally not be experiences that children or kids growing up to transition to adults, like the loss of Challenger, where I was glued to the television to watch the hearings to try to see what had happened that day, to explain why we had lost that space shuttle. To see Richard Feynman do his thing during that process with the O-ring, and then end up at Caltech years later, of course, with his legacy there. It's just interesting to me how these things were all interconnected, and really those science missions that NASA executed in the 70s really, I think, were my motivation to end up where I am today.
So you know about the risk. So how do you reconcile the risk of these missions versus the reward?
From a risk versus reward perspective, I really view the continued pushing of the envelope as an important thing to do. That's how we learn from a science and engineering perspective, and so kind of that's where where I come out as far as the risk versus reward. I think continuing to push into space challenges us as Americans, challenges us as scientists and engineers, and I think that continued push is important. I think the endeavor is a good one, because there's just so much scientific data that is collected in that same process. Of course, you can push the envelope in different ways as well, and I salute the folks that do it with undersea missions or other aspects where the engineering challenge is just to take humans to a specific location is just almost overwhelming at times, but they figure out a way.
And last question, the number of people who've gone to space, numbers in the hundreds, but it feels like we're sort of on the cusp of opening up spaceflight to many more. What would that mean to our understanding of the universe as a species to broaden this out?
I think there are many things that we learn as a species as more people are exposed to space missions, what the preparation takes, how we operate together internationally, cooperatively to execute things. I think in a microcosm, we hear this piece as astronauts, this overview effect that you're able to look down on the Earth and you're changed in some way by an appreciation that there aren't country boundaries or the fragility of the Earth. All those things kind of come to the forefront. I think we're all experiencing some of that as well right now with this pandemic situation, where that has connected us all in a way internationally that causes us to reconsider our connection and how important it is for us to kind of work together kind of going forward. So
thank you very much for your time, Bob. Godspeed.
Thank you. I very much appreciate it. Hopefully you'll be watching.
I will.
Oh, hey, Bob. Marcia Dunn talking to you. I'm looking at your launch pad out my window. You and Doug are going to be the first true NASA test pilots since Young and Crippen. From a personal standpoint, how big is this flight coming up and your role in it for you personally?
It's really interesting to try to think about the role that we'll play in history as we go forward. But I think for both Doug and I think we've said this a lot of times, is that we're going to focus on our role in history kind of after we've successfully accomplished the mission. I think there are just so many technical factors and things that we need to focus on to make sure that we pull this off, that our place in history, or even trying to put our names in the same sentences as the folks who have come before us is it seems premature until we've pulled it off.
Well, you're even color coordinated between the rockets, the spacesuits, the capsules, the Tesla cars going to the pad. How important is it to inspire through visuals like that? Not just what you're doing, but you're doing it in such visual style is the way I see it. Could you comment on that, please, too?
I think that whenever you kind of go forward as something that you're trying to use as a motivation or a mission that you have the responsibility to share with a wide audience, it's certainly important to present it in the most positive or the most complete or successful light that you can. I think that there are different ways to accomplish that. I think if you look at the launch and entry suit that we wore during the Space Shuttle missions, I think in some sense, that suit became iconic associated with the mission that was in front of it. I think still when you go and you look in movies, if they're trying to pretend to be astronauts, you'll often see something that's akin to a space shuttle launch and entry suit or the ascent entry suit, because people are so familiar with that visual, and it's become in and of itself its own piece of iconery. Now, what we're doing on the SpaceX side and the direction that they've chosen is to kind of reach back and kind of pull forward maybe a retro styling or a different way of creating their own unique kind of mission symbol or symbology, rather than trying to copy what was done on the space shuttle side. So I think both of those ways work. You can do it the way where you create something that already is in the history, like copying the space shuttle suit or copying something a little bit more like science fiction. But both of them have succeeded, I think, in terms of becoming iconic, in terms of symbolizing the mission in front of us, or the excitement associated with what we're going to accomplish.
Well, what about riding a Tesla to the pad? I mean, Tesla is the car of space travel, I suppose, right?
Well, I think that there's balances with that as well. I think the Tesla is what we take to the pad, but if you look at what we have in place from a contingency perspective, it's an armored personnel carrier that we would come back if we did have a hiccup that was out there. And so there's some importance to, you can look at those two things and look at them as one as a launch and entry suit on the space shuttle side versus the space shuttle suit. You can look at that MRAP and park next to a Tesla, and they all have their role and are trying to accomplish different aspects of the mission as required.
Well, I'm presuming your wife and son will be coming to the launch, that they're not going to have to stay away. Is that so? And will they be able to visit you in crew quarters once you're quarantined there at JSC and then here at KSC?
The intent, I think, going forward is to include our immediate families in that quarantine bubble. We've effectively had to do that as a part of the COVID-19 situation, where we still need to have someplace to live. It's impractical to jump into quarantine, particularly with the situation evolving as it was just a couple of months ago. And so we're already in quarantine with our families, and we plan to continue that. NASA has a plan to get our families to Kennedy in a quarantine fashion, and then to allow us to continue to see each other. And it's, in some sense, it's actually a little bit easier with the other restrictions we expect from a guest perspective, that our spouses won't have a lot of outside contacts reaching out to them in Florida, most likely.
Well, I know your wife is an astronaut, but your other family members, are they more worried about you riding a new rocket like this than they were for your shuttle launches? Are you sensing more tension among other family members and close friends?
I think that from a close friends perspective and family perspective, it's really hard from a rocket perspective to try to break down and say this rocket is more risky than another rocket. I think rocket flights in general are kind of all basketted in that case of flying in space has risk associated with it, and so I don't see a different level of expectation. They do often ask questions about our ability to interact with the commercial provider, with SpaceX in this case, versus our interaction with the NASA team and how that's going, because they kind of view us all wearing the same NASA badge when we were executing the space shuttle missions. But as you know, you follow it closely, more closely than family members do. There's a deep part of the aerospace community that is in the process of making sure operations on space station are conducted safely as well. That's not all NASA calculation and hardware that's built. There are a lot of companies and folks that support that hardware or analysis piece of it, and so we have to build good relations with those folks in order to be safe on space station. And we've had to do the same with SpaceX. And given 4 or 5 years, we've had a long time, and I think pretty successful based on where we are right now.
Well, everybody always wants to know how astronauts go to the bathroom in space, and how's that going to work on Dragon? I understand you have an actual toilet on Dragon. Is that just sort of a space set-aside, or is there a functioning commode?
There is a functioning hardware on board the Dragon to make it so you don't need to, do it the kind of old-fashioned diaper way, kind of throughout the mission. So there is a a functioning commode. And so I'm sure that will be a test point that folks will have keen interest in us getting some data on prior to the next mission going forward.
And I know that you've talked about starting traditions for this new era. Have you and Doug come up with any traditions yet on launch day? I don't know if that'll involve playing cards or, stops to the pad to take an outdoor break. What have you come up with yet, or is that still TBD?
We do have a series of things that we plan to do going forward. You'll see. I think the after we've accomplished them, it's a little bit uncertain as the schedule is being built right now as to what we'll be able to fit in opportunities-wise. But we're trying to draw upon our shuttle experience and our knowledge of the Soyuz experience. Both Doug and I spent quite a few launch trips, if you will, over on the Kazakh side, being able to see what those traditions were. And so the things that we can incorporate, we're definitely going to try to do some of the same sorts of things with dinners with groups at specific times, using some of the historic locations at the Kennedy Space Center, like the beach house that was that's down there, that's now a conference center but still has a nice beach house sign in front of it that we'll be able to utilize. A chance for our families to walk with us kind of solo around the pad grounds to get kind of a private tour kind of late in the launch flow after the capsule is out on the pad. We'll plan to do all those things, and there'll be some other traditions that you'll see as well that will unfold through the mission. But some of the secrets and traditions will probably play out just for future cruise knowledge as well.
Well, I guess I'll stay tuned. SpaceX in 10 years has gone from launching the very first rudimentary Dragon to putting astronauts on board. That's an amazing short period of time for a relative newcomer to aerospace business. How amazing is that in your mind that they've been able to come so far in so little time?
I think it's been really remarkable what SpaceX has accomplished with the transition from building a new rocket to a capsule that heads to the International Space Station to transitioning to human flight. I also think that it should come with a healthy dose of realization as well that it wasn't easy to get to where we are right now. 10 years is a long time, and we should have a healthy respect that they were going at a pretty good clip to accomplish what they've accomplished. And so I'm proud of them. I'm proud to be a part of it, and I think a big part of that was the cooperation and partnership that they've been able to build, or that NASA's been able to build with them, to share experiences, to make them as efficiently proceed forward as was possible.
Well, listen, Bob, thank you so much and good luck.
Thank you. Hopefully you'll be watching on the 27th of May.
Oh, I'll be right here on my front row seat. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Subscribe Space Snack.